Reform, and I'm up here to first remind you that our next lecture, we're going to take a bit of a break, and our next lecture will be March 11th. Matt Latner of the Goldwater Institute will be speaking on Friedman and Rawls, a pat to bipartisan K-12 reform. Is that a typo?
I guess a typo.
Okay. Path, maybe. Path. Well, I like paths, but paths are good too. So we encourage you all to come for that interesting talk. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Father Timothy Scully. Father Scully is professor of political science at Notre Dame University, and he's the director of their Institute for Educational Initiatives. Father Scully has been an advisor to U.S. presidents and U2 lead singers. Serious. I mean, he is a rock star advisor in every sense of the word. But probably most importantly, he has been a counseling advisor to young people interested in making a difference in the educational lives of disadvantaged children. And along that path, he developed the Alliance for Catholic Education, and that is what he's going to be speaking about today. But I must say that one of the most difficult things that I ever did in my life, with the exception of completing my PhD dissertation, was crossing Notre Dame's campus with Father Tim Scully. Because every few steps he'd be hailing some colleague, or he'd be stopping to advise an undergraduate, or he'd be greeting an alum. I can't believe we finally made it across that. It was quite a long trip, because every person who appears to Father Tim receives his undivided attention and his personal advice and nurturing. So today he's going to talk to us about his vision for the Alliance for Catholic Education and how it can serve the cause of education reform and even in many ways support what we do down here. So, Father Tim Scully.
Well, thanks. I just a couple things. First, a kind of a disclaimer, and that is that just about everybody in this room has more authority to speak on the subject that I'm going to share some thoughts on than I do. I'm a bit of an interloper. I'm a Latin American political scientist. That is, I study comparative politics, and all of my work is on kind of parties and party systems and electoral systems and religion and politics in the southern cone of Latin America. So how did a guy like me end up at the University of Arkansas today in front of you? After I got tenure, some of you will know this experience. I was talking to my spiritual director. Sometimes Catholic priests and others have spiritual directors, somebody you can share your soul with. I was talking to my spiritual director, a nun from Savannah, Georgia, Sister Lourdes Sheehan. And I was depressed because I thought, well, okay, so you get tenure, you work hard to get tenure. And so now what do you do with your life? And publish another 5 books and 17 more articles and then die, I guess. And I thought,
if you're lucky. If you're lucky. If your students are lucky.
So, anyway, I got kind of depressed, and I said to her, well, I didn't become a priest to become a professor of political science. And so she said, with this beautiful southern kind of incantation to her voice, she said, why don't you do something for children who are kind of at risk and underserved in our schools? So I said, fine. I said, what's your idea? She said, well, why don't we need teachers, because our sisters and brothers are disappearing, and we don't have talent in these faith-based, at-risk, inner-city Catholic schools. So that was 18 years ago. This nun kind of suggested that we get involved. I came back to Notre Dame after that conversation with my my wonderful friend, and I put an ad in the student newspaper, The Observer, and it just took out a 1-page ad just to try the waters. I wrote in the ad, big letters, tired of getting homework, ? Then give some, be a teacher. I thought, maybe 20 people, 15 people would show up. About 200 and some people showed up at that room that night. So I called Sister Lourdes and I said, hey, something special is going on. I think the Holy Spirit is calling us to do something special here. So that's how I got involved in this work. But as I say, I'm a bit of an interloper, and so you're going to hear the words of a practitioner more than a theorist. And I'll just ask for your mercy if you're going to start asking me very sophisticated methodological questions about measurements. I'm going to run into the corner in the fetal position and start sucking my thumb or something. Anyway, so that's who we are, and our mission is very simple, the Alliance for Catholic Education. It's funny, when you start something like this, you change stuff so frequently that our students call it always changing everything, which I find to be kind of a little bit of a compliment. But our mission is really simple. It's the task isn't easy, but it's to sustain, strengthen, and transform Catholic schools. The largest private school system in the country was formed by women, vowed religious women. These wonderful sisters, some of them belong to my religious community, which is called the Congregation of Holy Cross. But as you know, Catholics have all these different traditions that were formed many hundreds of years ago in many cases, and also brothers. In our tradition in the United States, for maybe a century and a half, there were very many wonderful vocations to be teachers for vowed religious, not priests or ordained ministers in our tradition, but kind of, if you will, between priest and the layperson. They're called religious, and for reasons that are pretty complex, those vocations pretty much dried up beginning in the 1960s. And kind of talk about a perfect storm. At pretty much the same time, schools like Notre Dame, and not just faith-based schools like Notre Dame, but other Ivy League and other elite colleges and universities, started to take a second look at their departments of education and started to close them. Most recently at the University of Chicago. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but just the truth of the matter is that Notre Dame, in its own kind of efforts to focus on academic excellence and its own deep skepticism of the quality of the School of Education, closed its School of Education in 1976. So when this nun came along and asked me 18 years ago, why don't you do something to put some talent into our schools, I had one huge organizational advantage. You have to forgive me, but I do think this is a slight organizational advantage, and that is I didn't have a School of Education faculty to contend with in terms of doing whatever kind I wanted to do. And so the slate was pretty clear, and it still is to us. It was a pretty robust School of Education in the Catholic tradition, but it was closed, and that kind of organizational academic space remained open until the early 1990s, when we started the Institute for Educational Initiatives. It's funny, you saw that picture of those sisters and brothers in front of what used to be our library. This is now our School of Architecture. But that's kind of our future. That's the Alliance for Catholic Education cohort, and I'm very grateful that I have 3 of my colleagues from the ACE program here and your graduate student. We're very proud of that. We're hoping to kind of employ a Leninist strategy and colonize your entire, well, maybe that's Gramsci, but just kind of colonize your whole Arkansas population out here little by little. But I shouldn't disclose our strategy. We began as a teacher training effort for faith-based teachers, and that's what ACE was for the first couple of years. But as we got deeper into the crisis that's facing inner city Catholic schools, we came to see, a little leadership team that we formed at Notre Dame, we came to see that the problems facing faith-based inner city schools, Catholic schools, and others are at least as grave, if not even sharper, than those that face public schools. So in the mid-2000s, we undertook to try to understand the set of problems that face our schools and how we can come up with a set of solutions to address those problems. So I just put before you these kind of quick thoughts. Imagine that this is our reality as a Catholic school system, right? Imagine losing the entire teaching force of the United States by 80% within 4 decades. That's what happened to our schools. And at the onset of this kind of vast transformation of our personnel, these are extraordinarily talented women who, for many reasons, chose no longer to subsidize so vastly this apostolate of Catholic education. There was no national plan, and this is a kind of a failure of our leadership as a Catholic church. There was no national plan for this transition. Of course, they didn't see it coming. There's been no systematic program to form lay people to take the leadership roles in this wonderful apostolate over. And finally, what you see in the 230 Catholic colleges and universities around the United States is you see that public education and public education formation programs have really basically been adopted as the paradigm for forming teachers, which I have absolutely no problem with. Obviously, they're extraordinarily talented and wonderfully rich professional programs. But our position is that to be a person who stands in the place of Christ in a classroom, and the kind of challenges and the kind of opportunities for human formation that enables you to kind of take on, that forming faith-based teachers ought to add a special dimension to the formation of a teacher. Among other reasons, because our elementary and secondary teachers almost always have to, in one way or another, infuse the faith into instruction. So yeah, I mentioned one education which we started this teaching program. Three things. These 200 teachers getting their master's degree at a given point at Notre Dame live in kind of an intentional Christian community. We're in 33 cities. And they're encouraged to develop their spirituality and their over the course of 2 years, 2 summers, and mentor teaching during the year, they're undertaking a rigorous professional formation program. In addition to that 200 master's degree earning teachers, we have enlisted the support of 14 other universities to kind of join us, because we didn't want to get any bigger. We felt that at about 200 in that program, that was about as many as we felt we could accommodate, giving the kind of personalized formation that is required for quality. As we got to know the problems more fundamentally in our schools, I'll bet you have found this in your own schools, in the public sector and other places, that the real trick has been leadership. That is, the school leader, the principal. So we developed a leadership program, and finally, actually, Bob and I were talking at breakfast about the need for training teachers to teach at-risk children in poverty, with some skills and tools that aren't normally delivered in a regular teacher training curriculum. So that's who we are at the master's level. I won't kind of bore you with the details of that unless you're interested when we have a conversation. I mentioned that we have enlisted the support, I guess, of 15 other Catholic colleges and universities, one not Catholic, of Valparaiso University. So together we provide 500 teachers to Catholic schools, and we're in 60 cities in 28 states. I mentioned that we came to the conclusion that unless we start forming very talented and entrepreneurial principals, that we can't sustain this work over time. So we formed a pretty robust principals program. Leading a Catholic school, leading a faith-based school, requires a certain set of entrepreneurial skills, including fundraising, that perhaps other leadership positions in schools doesn't require. So, but also being the faith leader in the building is an important skill that needs to be developed. We talked at breakfast about this extraordinary demographic phenomena that we're also familiar with, but you can't, I suppose, emphasize too much how this is changing the internal dynamics of our own faith tradition. There has never been a demographic transition in any ecclesial tradition like the Catholic Church in America today. Let me just give you one data. We're 26% of the population. 68% of practicing Catholics in the United States today, under the age of 35, are Latino. 68%. So you can imagine what that datum is for school-age children. So we launched at Notre Dame a pretty extensive national program to try to build capacity, English as a new language capacity, in our teacher corps nationally. And of course, one kind of shame in Catholic schools is that we haven't been as inclusive to learn as we need to be. So we're investing pretty heavily in that area as well. So that's where we're at. That's where our partners are at. Those are the states we serve. You'll see we're not much up in the Northeast because for those of you who know anything about our tradition and where we kind of started as immigrants, you'll see that 75% of our colleges, of those 235 colleges and universities that I talked about, are in this area here. So we felt that wasn't necessarily an area that we wanted to focus on. There's practically no significant Catholic higher education assets in that area. And that's where we decided to focus our energies. Okay, so that's basically what you'll see is those programs that I discussed. I'm kind of, when you come to Notre Dame, I hope you'll come. We'd love to see you. We're just building a new building, just finishing it, right next to the Golden Dome of the university. I'm kind of shocked at this whole thing because we started this in my office, my faculty office, 18 years ago in the Center for International Studies, and this is like really scary for me that we have all this support. So I think this is really important. Jay and I were talking up here earlier how important it is that some of our graduates stay in teaching. Believe it or not, 18 years into that service through teaching program, 70% of those 1,200 folks are still in classrooms. And that's the surprise to me. 50% of those are in public schools, and 50% of those roughly are in Catholic schools. But I would say that the formation of intellectuals, I mean, the fact that we have young people going off for PhDs and JDs and other areas, that's the kind of leadership formation. We take 1 in 7 applicants who apply to this program. So the average GPA is well north of 3.6, and we recruit, I suppose, the same kind of level of talent that you all are looking at as well. Well, I'm going to go through very quickly now, if I may, some of the more entrepreneurial activities that we have undertaken, because the needs that our school system are experiencing are just kind of endless, and so our growth has been a little bit endless. the first thing we did was when we saw that 70% of our teachers were continuing to remain in education, we formed the ACE Advocates, which is a national organization. They're organized in 33 cities, and they gather for fellowship and for service to Catholic schools in those cities. And basically we try to sustain the spiritual and community and apostolic lives of this army of talent, if you will. And so I guess we're in 26, I don't know what I said, but 26 cities were there. So that in each of those 26 cities we will have a monthly Eucharist, and we'll have a retreat, and we'll try to kind of strengthen and sustain the spiritual lives of these folks and their vocations. We formed a consulting firm, which is actually one of our largest kind of growth areas right now. What we found is that when we did that report I was talking to you about that stimulated so much activity internally to us, we found that the very schools and school systems that need consulting help can't afford it. I suppose that's not surprising to you, but it seemed kind of outrageous. So what we ended up doing is we formed a not-for-profit consulting group and hired some really smart people to form a SWAT team, if you will, to go nationally and to help schools and school systems. And they're doing wonderful work. I'm really delighted. In the summer, as a result of this talent that we're trying to build, we bring superintendents and principals to our campus by the dozens and by the hundreds for professional development opportunities. When we saw this demographic reality unfolding, it's the elephant in the room for the Catholic tradition, and maybe for your own work as well. The elephant in the room is the increasing challenge that we face meeting the educational needs of the Latino population. And the Latino population is, depending on whose data you're going to use, between 75 and 80% Catholic. And yet, because of the historic experience of Catholic education in Latin America, which is really an elite phenomena, very different from Western and Eastern European traditions, where we kind of came and Catholic schools were what allowed us to, as a community, to kind of integrate ourselves and to become successful in America. The Latino people who are here in this country are not from the sector of society who choose Catholic or private schools, elite schools, and as a result they don't choose them. I was mentioning at breakfast, just to give you one interesting, and I think it was surprising for me, a statistic, and that is that 4% of African American families in this country send their children to Catholic inner-city schools. 3% of Latino families send their children to Catholic schools. So it's got to tell you that it's not just financial. There's clearly a cultural unresponsiveness that Latino people are finding that these are not schools that they identify with or that they find welcoming. If we, as a tradition, I'm speaking obviously as a Catholic, so you're going to have to forgive me, because I am. But if we as a tradition fail to meet this need, it will be the first time we've failed a significant immigrant group's educational needs, and that would be a shame. That would be a real shame. That's not to say that we're not interested in other minority traditions, but we feel we have a special responsibility to this group whose educational needs, I think, as a national community, whether we're Catholic or not, I think we all would agree we're pretty much failing their needs. So we decided to do something nuts, and that was we decided to launch a campaign and build an infrastructure to double that percentage from 3% to 6%. Now that may not seem like a big deal, but look at the end. You go from 3% to 6% given the growth, and you go from 290,000 to 1 million children. So we have pilot programs going in 5 or 6 cities, in New York, in Chicago, in San Antonio, in Houston, and LA. In every one of those cities, we have a team of people working with pastors and local school folks. We've hived off in every case 20 to 30 to 40 schools. And we're trying interventions, trying to kind of see, what works. We're finding small things matter a lot. Like the secretary in the office. Instead of snarling at them in English, could we have somebody who actually is bicultural or bilingual minimally? And as you know, when Latinos, I'm going to stereotype here, but I mean I lived for almost a decade in Latin America, so I kind of half know these people a little bit. When Latinos choose a school, they don't go with mom and dad and the kid. They go with the aunt, the grandma, the whole tribe. They arrive, 20 of them, and so when they get to these school recruitment events, there's like 1 chair, 2 chairs. They're expecting like the mother. That's just not. You got to have Our Lady of Guadalupe in the front yard welcoming these people, So they know Our Lady of Guadalupe. And when they see Our Lady of Guadalupe, they go in. They don't care what it is. They go in. So anyway, so that's one crazy... we recruited this. If you want to have some fun one time, you should invite to your seminar here the priest who leads this. He's an Italian guy, but he's more Mexican than Italian. And he's a priest who's built all kinds of inner-city schools across the Southwest, Father Joe Corpora. He will really entertain you. You should ask him to give you a workshop on how you get Latinos into schools, because believe me, he's got some great insights. And so we're making a little difference. We called it the Advantage Campaign because, and here I'm in deep water because I'm next to the 2 most nationally prominent experts in measuring this in the country. But anyway, some research suggests that minority students are 42% more likely to graduate from high school and 2.5 times more likely to graduate from college. And the Catholic school advantage is especially advantaged for minority and at-risk children. So that's where you see the greatest part of the advantage. So we're kind of like with our Latino community. Come on, you guys! I mean, this is a good that can help your children. You're going to think we're kind of drunk with crazy ideas. We probably are. I see you're going to have Matt Ladner. I'm a big fan of Matt Ladner in March. He's a great guy. But we happen to believe, when I say we, I mean the University of Notre Dame and the Roman Catholic Church believes that parents ought to have a choice as to where their children study, and it oughtn't to have to depend on the zip code. So we institutionally are committed to that goal. And I can say that here. I'm guessing that I'm not the only one in this room who feels that way. And if I were, I wouldn't care, because I think it's the honest to God right thing to do from a social justice perspective. So what we have found is that honestly, it's going to be very difficult to maintain these schools in our inner cities without some kind of public support. So we're big believers in tax credits. We're big believers in vouchers. We're big believers in anything that can give at-risk children a better chance at integrating themselves effectively and becoming who God made them to be. We decided to get in this game by creating Notre Dame ACE Academies. We have 3 in Tucson. We're opening 3 more in Tampa next year. And we plan on opening 3 every year for the next decade. And we only open these where there's public-private partnerships. So in Arizona, there's a tax credit that's, of course, being challenged in court. I've been sued twice, I'm happy to say. Both cases have ended up in the Supreme Court, and both times we won. So I'm hoping that Arizona will, and I'm sure that we all don't agree on that, by the way, so I'm looking forward to the discussion later. These are full, comprehensive school reform efforts that we basically have become those nuns that you saw earlier. We've become those nuns. We take the principal, we take the teachers, That's the guy, by the way, I want you to invite sometime. He is hysterical, this guy here. You should invite him to. He's head of our Catholic School Advantage campaign, and this guy here is head of our Notre Dame Ace Academies. Some of you may know John Schoenig. John is a great fan of yours. He just graduated from Notre Dame's law school. He was the kind of chief fundraiser for the Alliance for School Choice. He was an ACE teacher as well. Anyway, we just formed a program for K-12 educational access at Notre Dame, and John is leading that and building a team. And basically its charge is to advocate and to find ways where the Catholic community can get involved in this social justice issue that we find so compelling. It is not a research institute. It's an advocacy institute. I just tacked this on. Not surprisingly, we're really interested in children and character, and one of the most important vehicles for doing that is preparing coaches to employ sports for building character. And so we have a pretty significant presence in the Alliance for Catholic Education to train coaches. Well, my religious community is international, and so I just mentioned that we've been asked to get involved in some international work. My religious community has about 24 schools in Haiti, many of which were destroyed in the earthquake a year ago. So we're building a teacher training institute in partnership with the Ministry of Education here. We just bought a campus in Cape Haitian. It's one of the I'm going to Haiti next week. It's one of the crazier things we've done, but it's something that I think we have to do. Not surprisingly, we have a presence in Chile. I lived for 5 years in Chile, and we've got a great cohort of teachers in Chile and teacher trainers. And I wanted, because Anna's here, I wanted to mention that we have a pretty significant presence in Ireland. I am not, despite what you might have thought, I am not a Latino. I am in fact Irish. And so let me just close with 3 slides of questions for you that are areas that we find of great need for ourselves, and I just kind of ask you for your thoughts and help and advice. This whole area of research that you are so expert at is an area that's really incipient for ACE. It's much more developed in the Center for Research on Educational Opportunity that's led by Mark Behrens, who's a partner, I think, of yours, Pat and Jay. But it's an area where, I know you all, many of you go to this American Educational Research Association meeting. And, I was pretty surprised. I've only been to one. I'll never go back. I don't go to the American Political Science Association meetings either, but I find them brutal. But I was kind of surprised that there were special interest groups for just about every left-handed, artists who were discriminated against when they were 14 and whatever. There wasn't a single special interest group with regard to faith-based education, which is such an important part of our nation's kind of civic tradition. So anyway, we formed one, and I would hope that you would kind of get involved in that a little bit and support it and bring papers to it and stir things up a little bit. Talk about, political.
So you want us to go to meetings that you won't go to?
You're going to go anyway. Especially the graduates. The only ones who end up having to go to these things are the poor graduate students who lose their jobs, Actually, the only good outcome of the American Education, or AERA, that I heard of is, and I understand that Gary was ultimately attracted to this place through a meeting at the AERA. I thought, well, that's worth it then. The second area that we really feel we need help at is, James Coleman, who kind of invented that expression of the Catholic School Advantage from his work in Chicago, and then Tony Breik followed up Maureen Hallinan's work. it's an area that I feel there's a growing evidence gap between charter schools and faith-based schools, that if we don't start to close that gap, we're going to get left behind permanently. And we need your artful intervention and help. Is there an advantage? If there isn't, how can we build one in? How do we measure it? How do we quantify it? How do we, I know that I'm a bit of a skeptic with regard to convincing some people about the value of choice, because my senior senator from my home state, Dick Durbin, I don't think there's any data you could provide him with that ultimately would change his mind on this particular. So you can forget research with that. It's a political issue with regard to some people. But it's not with regard to everyone. And if we don't have the evidence to support the idea, the conviction that we have that we're delivering a value, why should people support it? So we don't have the data, and I would challenge you to continue to do the important work that you do, because without your work and further work, I don't think that we can sustain our work. And I would say the same about our efforts. We're just very weak in measuring. It's very difficult to measure the quality of the teachers you're sending into the classrooms and their impact on the value added. It's just very difficult to do. I'd love your thoughts on that. We know that the inputs are decent. In other words, the strength of the folks that we're receiving to form as teachers are good, despite the 3 people we've sailed to. But are they any good in the classroom? And we've gone after this with some energy, and we're not where we need to be. And just kind of finally, I mentioned that we're pretty unapologetic about our advocacy, and the reason we are is that school choice is at the heart of Catholic social teaching. So we admire and support and you can count on our partnership and interest in the School of Education Reform. I think it's one of the most important things happening in America, and we really applaud your work. So that'd be all I have to say at this point, and then maybe I can stop here and learn from your questions and your thoughts. So thanks for listening for a minute. So yeah, Jay.
I'll break the ice. Catholic schools have remarkable autonomy to be pursuing things that are very innovative and different from traditional public schools, and yet on many, many dimensions they look very similar. They employ very similar salary schedules. They often have similar requirements for credentials for who they're hiring. They are using a lot of the same pedagogical techniques, a lot of the same basic curriculum. And so why do you think Catholic schools do look very different on certain dimensions? For example, administratively, they look very different. They're very lean, especially in central administration. I was struck spending time in Cleveland that the Archdiocese office for Catholic education was
3 people or something.
2. Right, there was the person in charge and the secretary, and that was it. So their central administration for the entire Archdiocese Catholic system was 2 people. But so they look different there, but when you get down to the kind of the school level and the classroom level, they begin to look a whole lot like public schools in all sorts of formal ways. Why is that? Why don't things look different? Is it because these are the right things to do?
Well, I mean, I can only conjecture, and I open it up to others' opinions, but I think it's related precisely to the first reality that you noted, that we've underinvested tremendously intellectually and conceptually in these schools. There's literally, when we started ACE 18 years ago, I was wondering who we were going to bump into. You bump into building a political science department or Latin American politics, whatever. You bump into your competitors, and you're stealing with talent. And there's no one out there, Jay, looking at these schools. That is to say, there's no intellectual, conceptual effort that's national, that's kind of trying to reinvent Catholic schools. These are mom and pop organizations that are led by pastors that are out there breaking up fights in the lunchroom, and they don't have time to invest in the conceptual side. Now, there's some exceptions, right? There's the Cristo Rey model. That's a really interesting, I don't know if you're familiar with the Cristo Rey model, but it's a really interesting program where, at-risk children, high school aged, go to school 4 days a week, and the fifth day they work in an internship, a corporate internship, and that's how the school is sustained financially. These internships are paid about $18,000. I think the curricular side of that has developed very nicely, and it's a very integrated, sustainable, boutique model. But when you look at the 2.3 million children in our elementary schools and secondary schools, you're right. The innovation that is possible is endless, and yet that's why we decided to kind of get in the game a little bit with these Notre Dame Ace Academies. And there are other small exceptions as well, which you're probably is the Memphis Jubilee schools. I mean, there's some interesting experiments going on. I would say that this is the most exciting and interesting time in Catholic education in terms of little entrepreneurial things that are happening that we've seen in maybe 100 years. So it's an opportunity, though. Love your thoughts as to how we can get more involved. Sorry, sir.
Ray Greenwood, I'm a professor in counseling at Edward Forum and former dean. Would you tell us two parts?
I actually know your name. Thank you for the efforts that you did to kind of make this all possible.
Well, 2 parts. One, tell us a little more about how you prepare your teachers and what kind of faculty do you have that's engaged with the preparation of teachers.
You bet. Well, since we didn't have a school of education, we had to figure that out. And so I belong to a religious community. We have several colleges and universities in the United States and across the world. One of them is the University of Portland in Oregon. And they have a pretty robust school of education. So I called the president of the University of Portland and I said, hey, listen, would you set up a satellite campus on Notre Dame's campus? And he said, sure, why not? And so, because we're, in the same religious community, the Congregation of Holy Cross sponsors both Notre Dame and Portland. So he set up a satellite. So we worked hard with the education faculty at the University of Portland to kind of come up with an alternative certification and licensing model that made sense. And we're in 30-some states, so it's, it gets complicated from a licensing point of view, but it's not impossible. And so we piggybacked on the University of Portland and we built a model. I don't know if you're familiar with a scholar who's a psychologist who unfortunately passed away very early in his professional life. His name was Michael Presley. He was a reading specialist. Anyway, Michael came then to be our local director of studies. He was a chairholder in the Department of Psychology. He was a reading and literacy specialist. And kind of controversial guy, really interesting fellow. At a certain point, we became so big that the University of Portland knocked on my door and said, listen, you're bigger than our school at this point. We had grown. Our MAT, which at that time was an MAT, had grown to be larger than Portland's. So we were then faced with the challenge of building our own faculty and our own program. So today we have about 70 full-time equivalent faculty and staff kind of manning this effort. And we have, what we do is we tenure people through a department, so psychology, sociology, political science, and then we have a special professional faculty that's about 40 people. And so we're building our own faculty that way. With regard to the kind of conceptual framework, I was afraid you might ask that. Honestly, I'm not the best person to answer. I could BS and talk about something here, but to be honest with you, I kind of have turned that over to people who are the specialists. The director of the academic program for the MED is a physicist, a lifelong educator, was our math and science instructor when we were with the University of Portland. And I wish he were here so badly right now, because he'd be able to interact with you on this issue much more effectively than I could. I hope that's honest enough. Yeah, please.
So you showed interesting statistics about the need for Catholic teachers, but there are lots of places where public schools are in dire need of teachers. Here in Arkansas, we have lots of problems attracting teachers to the Mississippi Delta. They rely a lot on TFA, those sorts of, and trying to get non-certified teachers, all those sorts of things. As the main institution in the state, being on the opposite side of the state, it's hard for us to supply teachers to that area. We're trying to figure out how can we supply more teachers to that area. How can we build a program where we can be more effective at sending teachers out to different parts of the state. And it strikes me that you're in one place, but you have students going all across the country and even the world to teach in some of these schools. So what are some pieces of advice you could help us in developing a program where we can reach further than we're reaching now? How do we recruit the type of students that would like to go to those places? What are the type of things that you've learned through the years that might help us in developing that type of program?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, right, we're in the talent business, and you've succeeded in bringing to Northwest Arkansas some of the most interesting and innovative and thoughtful experts in social science in this area. And so I can't imagine anything more important that you could do than to continue to recruit the level of talent that you've been able to recruit. And talented people want to be with other talented people, and you've seen that. Look at this room. I mean, right now. I mean, this is the result of what you did. But then I guess it's a question of will. You can do anything you want. I mean, what would stop you from doing whatever you want to do? I mean, just do it, and just don't ask questions, and just do it. I mean, why would the University of Arkansas have a hard time supplying teachers to the Delta in Arkansas, for God's sake? I don't understand that. Sounds to me like we got to have your former dean here get involved in that issue and take care of it.
They don't want to live in that part of the world. That's a big factor in terms of that. So.
Well, the 8 students probably don't want to live where they're going, so how does that work?
They're sent. I mean, where did you teach, Anna?
I was in Tampa, Florida. So we have a handful of nice locations.
Where were you, Dan?
Montgomery,
Alabama. How about you?
Montgomery, Alabama.
Montgomery, yeah. Well, you weren't asked.
No.
No. See, we have a slightly different religious tradition. Be happy to send some Catholic school teachers down there if you want. Maybe I'm half kidding about that. Sorry.
What do you think about the charter school movement? Has it been a boon or a detriment for what you're trying to accomplish? Because I can see on one hand some people arguing that school choice of any variety is good, and the more charter schools are out there, the more people are used to the idea, people on both sides of the aisle are used to the idea that parents should have a choice as to where their kids go to school, shouldn't be locked down to one physical location. On the other hand, there's an argument that a lot of charter schools might be driving some of the Catholic schools out of business because they're presenting themselves as a free alternative to the public schools in certain urban areas that people are trying to escape. So, on balance, what would you say?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I don't think there's any more vexing problem and opportunity. I don't really know what I think. I really don't know what I think. I tell you one thing. In principle, I'm a huge supporter of charter schools and choice of any kind. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I think our whole organization would say that. It's a vexing issue because the temptation and the invitation that we seem to be getting from leading supporters of the charter movement, including Senator Dick Durbin, who I mentioned earlier, is that, listen, your future rests in wraparound charter schools. So, depending on the state law, we'll give you all the charters you want. And I feel like I'm talking to the devil, honestly, but anyway. We'll give you all the charters you want. You guys do your religion in the morning, like the Utah public schools, if you will. They're all next to these Mormon deals. You can do your religious education in the morning, the afternoon. You can take them on a summer camp. But the educational deal is going to be without crucifixes in the classroom, and you're going to put a burlap sack over Mary, and you're just going to have your classrooms that way. It's a huge temptation. And I think we as a tradition make that temptation and try it. And I think we should experiment. And I think you're going to see experiments in the next in Chicago, you have one. Our hierarchy is extraordinarily nervous about this. Because, the idea that we have about human formation is that it's an integrated, holistic experience. And so I don't know what I think about it. I think we should experiment. I think we should try. You asked me philosophically, am I supportive, and are we supportive of charter schools? The answer has to be yes. I mean, how could we not be? It's about children. Yes.
Just this holistic view of life, and presumably getting Latino Catholics into Catholic schools would further this aim, or other American Catholics into Catholic schools. However, as I recall, Catholics who attend Catholic schools are just as likely to leave the church as those who do not attend Catholic schools. Two questions about that. One, is that a cause? How does that affect the way that that y'all understand the connection between the schools, the mission of the schools, and the role of the church? And secondly, what does that signify to you?
Well, I'm not familiar with the research that you're referring to.
I think this was what's the organization in Georgetown, CARA?
Yeah. I'm not challenging the datum. I'm just not familiar with it. What I am familiar with is data that may not contradict that, but it certainly runs in a different direction. That is that Catholic school students tend to be much more involved. So this doesn't contradict what you're suggesting, but Catholic school graduates tend to be much more involved in the Catholic Church, much more generous. I can tell you that 68% of all vocations to the priesthood in the Catholic tradition in the United States are products of Catholic schools. Catholic school students tend to be much more engaged civically, as I'm sure you're familiar with Dave Campbell's work, volunteer more actively, vote more frequently, join civic organizations more generously. So now, what's occurred in mainstream religious traditions in the United States, and the Catholic Church is no exception, but it's not, but I mean to say that, it's no exception, is that Anglo-Catholics are leaving mainstream religious traditions in droves in the United States. That's Methodists, that's Lutherans, that's true of Catholics as well. What's equally true, that is not true of those other traditions, is that we're getting this massive infusion of Latino Catholics, which is changing the demographics so dramatically in our tradition that isn't the case in those other mainstream traditions. So getting back to your question, I'm guessing that it reflects pretty much what's occurring nationally. That's all.
Yeah.
That's what I. But I, hell,
Yeah.
I'm in front of all these measurement people.
I do sort of have a question for you, Tim. So you described the mission of ACE and Catholic schooling as allowing and encouraging each child to realize their full God-given potential. Well, there's a measurement problem there, right? because we don't really know what everyone's God-given potential is. So, I mean, you spoke of some outcomes, civic outcomes, where there's a strong connection between Catholic schooling and positive civic outcomes. But basically, how do you know when a Catholic school has been successful or is being successful? I mean, I guess that's the question. Is how do you know?
Yeah, and boy, it's that talk about the big question that you all must be facing all the time. And what's the purpose of schooling, whether it's a Catholic school or not? First of all, is the purpose of schooling univocally measurable by this achievement data that people are so obsessed with? Well, not as far as I'm concerned. And I don't have children. But if I were to have children, I'd be damned if they were going to measure my child's worth in terms of those tests. They have to be part of the equation, but they can't be the equation. What do we mean by human flourishing? What do we mean by that? Well, I can tell you in the Catholic tradition, and I presume that we all would kind of embrace more or less a kind of a American civic ideal that human flourishing goes well beyond that data. And that's one of the things that makes me very nervous about where our educational elites are taking some of these normative questions about how we measure our success. I have to think pretty much. I don't have what a successful Catholic school student would be like, from my point of view, would be very similar to a successful public school student, I'm guessing, with the added dimension of faith. And that is character and wit. Character and wit. Character, which is very different from, it's a deep sense of someone's value and a deep sense of the awesome dignity of every human being, and wit, which is not just intelligence. It's a sense of your own humanity and depth of the gift of being alive. So anyway, how do you measure that? It's difficult. In our Notre Dame ACE academies, we have big logos outside of these 3 schools we have in the inner city of Tucson, and it says, "Preparing students for college and heaven." I love that. Preparing students for college and heaven, because we're trying to prepare kids for both a successful and rich and wonderfully human life on earth, but for eternal life as well. So anyway, sorry. Yes, sir.
I'm not from the College of Education, so I'm wondering how anyone could be in favor of school choice, charter schools, if they thought that this would lead to a true mixing of various elements of society. I think if you're for school choice, you know that the people who will take advantage of that are going to leave the public schools with the problems of society. And so I guess I think there's a touch of cynicism in school choice, and with all due respect,
that's fine.
Wanting that benefit for Catholic schools, because you know the people that will take advantage of that are going to leave you exclusive. If you thought it was going to mix you just like the public schools in the center of Chicago, you would not be in favor of that, would you?
I mean, this is an important philosophical question of who makes choices.
You know who's going to make the choice.
Well, Okay, but wait a minute here now. You asked me questions, so you got to let me try to respond a little bit. And so I guess the Irish are famous for answering questions with a question. So let me ask you a question. And that is, well, what's the solution to children who find themselves in schools where their parents don't have a choice because of their financial means, and they find themselves locked in failing schools? In other words, it's a little bit of a dilemma. You have to make some choices in public policy, and what's the Pareto optimal response? Is it to say, well, then, you know what? Let's leave them all in jails that we call schools. What's the Pareto optimal response? The Pareto optimal response is to give as many people choices as you can and to entrust those parents with that choice. That's what I think the Pareto optimal response is. By the way, people of goodwill can disagree on this.
Well, that Dick Durbin doesn't think so.
Well, let me talk to you about Dick Durbin.
I watch him on CNN, so I know.
I had dinner with Senator Durbin recently for 2.5 hours discussing this issue, and let me tell you that Senator Durbin went to Catholic schools. He sent his children to Catholic schools. He's a big believer in Catholic schools. He thinks that Catholic schools are the cat's meow. But Senator Durbin apparently thinks that Catholic schools and that wonderful opportunity ought to be for children of senators and not for children of, people who don't have opportunity. And I just think that's the most cynical and I told him so, by the way. I just think it's devilish to suggest that the only person, as Howard Fuller's fond of saying, the only person who enjoys school choice who lives in public housing happens to live in the White House. Anyway.
Well, just one other thing. If all parents are a large majority were sophisticated enough or educated enough to take advantage of the choices, you would get schools that look pretty much alike. But what the fear is that choice is made available to the masses. There won't be enough sophisticated parents among certain groups, classes, socioeconomic groups, to leave anything but prison-type schools behind.
Yeah, well,
I'll rest my case there because I'm not knowledgeable beyond what I've said.
Well, and I appreciate that. Neither am I. We're like two drunks in a bar. But let me just complete the circle by saying that our country is founded on the idea that people ought to be free to choose things. And we entrust these unsophisticated people that are implicit in the comment with electing the most powerful person on the planet to elect the President of the United States. We entrust choice to people who may or may not be people who are trustworthy. But that's just the way our creed has structured our country. I just say one thing that's just worth reflecting on, and that is if our country is based on the idea of equality of opportunity, then the way we have structured our school system is a blatant lie to that creedal statement. Because anybody who thinks that our school system in this country is based on the notion of providing equal opportunity to the people in this country is full of crap, as far as I'm concerned. That's just not true. It's a big fat lie, and it's a huge scar on the social justice tradition of our country. Anyway, now I feel strongly about this, as do you, and so I appreciate it.
Last question.
Well, how about we have two, Trey and Bob? I just.
You're the boss.
Yeah, Trey. Who's going?
Well, can we keep with the controversial here? So, why not? Mr. Kress came here last part of last year, and a gentleman raised his hand and sort of made a comment about Teach for America, about how we often leap, and I am a TFA alone.
I'm aware of that.
Our attrition rate is high, and the question he sort of posed to Mr. Kress was, where are they now?
When you say your attrition rate is high, how are you defining attrition? Those who finish the 2
whatever
years?
the critics decide it is. So if it was 90% stay, in the classroom, well, you still have an attrition rate. So
Okay.
it's bad.
Okay. But by attrition, Trey, you mean people who do not continue in teaching? Okay.
And
Okay.
a lot of the data that's being used in these cases it's similar to what you presented today, but they look at that piece of the pie, like you're 70%. And, you said 35 are still in Catholic schools.
50-50, yeah.
Okay, so what I was gathering from you, well, it's sort of it's 2/3 stay in education, TFA, okay? And it's not quite 50-50 in this case, but it's about what you're describing, 35% remain in traditional public schools, okay? I'm going to go a different route with this, where the new response is our impact outside of the classroom. So the question I'm sort of asking you in this case is, with your ACE alum,
Yes.
how are they impacting policy at a larger scale? You described PhDs, you described one gentleman who went to law school. What are they doing to sort of accomplish your mission to transform Catholic education in a definitive moment? Because we're arguing a quant thing for some of our critics that we're never going to win. We'll always have an attrition rate for humans in this case. But there's an impact that you have post-service. And I'd like to hear more about that.
It's funny to describe somebody who has chosen, in the intimacy of the way you make a decision about the vocation you have in life, it's funny to describe someone who chooses not to continue to teach in a classroom as part of an attrition rate. I just don't think about stuff that way. And so you'll have to forgive me, and with all due respect for whoever was asking Mr. Kress or whoever was asking the question, I don't care what the person's predisposition has to be is with regard to the question. I don't second guess people's vocations and where they go in life. I mean, they could be a music instructor, or they could be a trainer. I'm thinking of people who graduate from our program, trainer of seeing-eyed dogs, or they could be a fireman, or they could be. But who are we to say that's an attrition rate or a? We're into forming human beings in order that they might serve God and others in the way that they day by day are able to kind of figure it out in life, which is complicated in life. And so I don't know. I don't like the way the question's posed, and you'll just have to forgive me. I just think that we have to give people an opportunity to follow their life's path in the way that God is inviting them to, and not make huge judgments about that. We're not in business to form Catholic school teachers for life. We're in business to allow people to discover their vocations. And if that leads them to the classroom, that's just terrific. The shock of my life has been that 70% of those people have discovered that their vocation is teaching. And that's been a shock to me. I did not expect that. I expected more of a Teach for America deal, which I'd be surprised if it was 66%, but I don't think that's a criticism of the program at all, a legitimate criticism. Because what you're trying to do is infuse people with talent to serve our country and to discover their vocation. Anyway, I apologize. Yes, sorry.
First, just preface to my question. This is not a question about whether, or comment for that matter, about whether choice is good or bad. I'm just not getting into that with this question, so don't misinterpret it. But just taking as given, there's Catholic schools, there's public schools, and there's other private schools as well. My question or comment is with regard to the goals of those schools, because I think you may have, in my view anyway, understated the differences in the goals. If you back up and think of, well, as a parent, and I put my kids went through public schools, one is delegating to the school a certain in loco parentis thing, responsibility, but the extent of that responsibility that I'm delegating may vary, okay? For someone who is choosing a Catholic school or another parochial school, where you have a very closely shared concept of what character means and what the other associated attributes mean, I'm willing to delegate more of that responsibility to the school. If I am, if I'm sending my children to a public school, and I've got a good, intact family, that I would like to be the one that is the major shaper of my kids' character. I don't want them to get. I want this is pretty much to stick to the academics with a few, uncontroversial character things like don't lie and steal. Okay. And that's about it. I mean, because I don't, for example, to take perhaps an egregious example, but it's in the news. There are teachers up in Madison, Wisconsin right now who think their idea of character education is to take the kids out onto the picket line and, proclaim for social justice in a concept that I may not necessarily agree with.
Right.
So I think you may have overstated the degree, for some of us anyway, what we're looking for out of the schools. If I had sent my kids to a parochial school, of my religion, I'm maybe willing to have delegated more of that to the school. But for the public school, which of course has people from all different kinds of, backgrounds and values and so on, I think they should, to a large extent, stay away from that.
Fair enough. I appreciate that, and you can just tell how the minute I entered, the only experience of public education I ever had was at Cal Berkeley, so you're right. And let me tell you, they didn't leave their values at the doorstep. I mean, that's fine, and I completely agree from a philosophical level. It's just that, let me leave you with one doubt, and that is that when you have a child in front of you, you are communicating values every moment. I cannot imagine that you're not. So I don't know what the values are that you're communicating, but you are communicating values.
Yeah, no.
And you're communicating certain...
That's what I'm saying. I want that to be my job primarily.
But guess what? I hate to shock you, but that you can't hive off that experience of the child. The child is going to pick up in that school all kinds of values, whether you like it or not, from the teacher and from her and his peers. So, it's just a question of how you think about it. But there are values being communicated about consumption and about materialism and about sex and about human worth and about punishment and about values and rewards and life's goods and all the time. So when you send that child out in the morning, don't think that, Johnny's going to come back and say, Daddy, what is it that proper human sexuality calls for in this case? My guess is that they're going to pick up all kinds of other little messages. Anyway. Hey, listen, you've been so generous with me. Thanks, and thanks for allowing me to be slightly outrageous occasionally.